The boardroom's silence was shredded by the piercing sound of alerts as monitors flashed red with collapsing stock values. Michael Donovan said, "How the hell did this happen overnight?" His words cracked under the weight of disbelief. Amelia Cross whispered, "The markets turned against us, and whispers of fraud are already circulating." The fluorescent lights hummed while the air tightened with dread, pressing every chest against invisible walls. Oliver Crane, the chief financial officer, slammed his fist on the mahogany table, muttering, "This is sabotage, not coincidence." The narrative unfolded with chaos clawing its way through the fortress of glass and steel that once symbolized victory. Screens replayed news anchors shouting accusations of corruption, as faces of employees outside the boardroom glowed pale with panic. Michael Donovan's heart thudded with the sudden realization that the empire he built was tilting toward ruin. Betrayal, not just market tides, was written across the tension in the room. In that moment, trust became as fragile as glass under a hammer, and the war for survival had already begun before anyone moved. The chaos outside the boardroom spread through every floor as employees whispered into phones, their faces shadowed by fear. Michael Donovan said, "They are feeding the media lies faster than we can contain them." Amelia Cross replied, "Regulators are already circling. If this spreads unchecked, we will be stripped apart." The narrator described the suffocating tension, the kind that makes walls feel closer and hallways echo like tunnels of dread. Oliver Crane's heavy breathing filled the silence before he muttered, "This isn't just a financial assault, this is a declaration of war." The CEO's eyes, once calm and steady, flickered with rage and disbelief. Trust had always been his weapon, but now it was the weakness being exploited. The storm of betrayal tightened its grip as every screen lit up with accusations. Every whisper carried the weight of suspicion, and every moment sharpened into a blade aimed at his legacy. The newsroom screens glowed with headlines that carved into reputations like knives. Michael Donovan said, "They have turned my empire into a spectacle." Amelia Cross whispered, "Public opinion moves faster than truth, Michael." Oliver Crane gritted his teeth, muttering, "If we don't counter this, they will bury us alive." The narrator's voice carried the tension of betrayal spreading like wildfire through the company. Every phone call unanswered, every investor silent, every ally distant. It was as if invisible walls had sealed the CEO into a coffin of glass and steel. The empire was collapsing in real time, and the man who once commanded fear now found himself staring into the abyss of isolation. Panic clawed through the trading floor where phones rang endlessly, unanswered as numbers spiraled into oblivion. Michael Donovan said, "Every second we wait, we bleed more." Amelia Cross muttered, "The regulators want blood, not explanations." Oliver Crane's voice cracked, "They want you gone, Michael. They want your name erased." The narrator emphasized how fear had replaced loyalty, with each worker glancing nervously at the man who once commanded their admiration. The boardroom glass was no longer a fortress but a cage, and outside it the city itself seemed to hold its breath. The empire of steel and glass had become an empire under siege. The CEO stood frozen, not by weakness but by the scale of betrayal rushing in like a flood. Michael Donovan said, "I built this empire with my own hands, and now vultures circle before the blood has even dried." Amelia Cross replied, "The vultures are inside too, Michael." Oliver Crane whispered, "If we don't act now, we won't get another chance." The narrator painted the scene with sharp contrasts, glass walls trembling under shouts, screens glowing with disaster, hearts pounding with fear. What once was power now turned into fragility, and every passing second stretched like eternity. The war had begun, and there was no room left for hesitation. The storm spread beyond glass walls into markets now drunk with blood, investors calling for heads before reason. Michael Donovan said, "They want my crown before the fight has even begun." Amelia Cross whispered, "The board is restless. Some are already swaying under pressure." Oliver Crane muttered, "If we do not control this meeting today, they will throw you into the fire." The narrator described corridors filled with whispers, staff watching screens like mourners at a funeral. The CEO walked with clenched fists, his reflection fractured by polished steel elevators. Every step toward the boardroom felt heavier, as though the floor wanted him to sink into its depths. Betrayal's stench lingered in every corner, thick with fear and calculation. Michael Donovan's empire was still standing, but the cracks in loyalty grew louder than thunder. In that march of dread, the company no longer belonged to him alone. It was a battlefield crawling with knives in the shadows. The boardroom swelled with murmurs, faces tense with anticipation, as if vultures awaited a carcass. Michael Donovan said, "Silence the chaos outside these doors and face me here." Amelia Cross leaned closer and muttered, "Half of them smell opportunity in your fall." Oliver Crane added, "They want to believe the numbers, not the truth." The narrator described the table polished but scarred by fists and doubt, while every chair seemed more throne than seat. Board members shifted in silence, their eyes searching for weakness like predators stalking prey. Shadows stretched across the glass, the city's skyline mocking the storm inside. In the span of a heartbeat, alliances trembled and reputations turned into weapons. Michael Donovan sat at the head, not as a king, but as a man besieged in his own fortress. The debate erupted, numbers hurled like weapons, accusations painted sharper than blades. Michael Donovan said, "These are not losses, they are engineered attacks." Amelia Cross snapped, "Proof is what they demand, not theories." Oliver Crane muttered, "Every dollar drained was guided by unseen hands." The narrator described the crescendo of voices colliding, screens alive with red streaks, board members shouting over one another as sweat gleamed under harsh lights. Michael Donovan's voice cut through the noise like steel across glass, yet behind it lurked a tremor of desperation. Betrayal brewed not just in silence, but in the very words spoken, twisting like a dagger poised to strike. The meeting was no longer about survival of the company, but survival of the man who led it. The city outside reflected dusk's red glare against the glass walls as tempers burned hotter. Michael Donovan said, "If you tear me down, you tear down the company with me." Amelia Cross hissed, "They already believe you are the fire consuming it." Oliver Crane whispered, whispers of replacement already circled the corridors. The narrator painted the air heavy with dread, every breath thick with betrayal, while silence now felt deadlier than shouting. Each glance between board members carried silent verdicts, each hesitation tightened the noose. Michael Donovan leaned back, gaze fixed on the skyline, searching for allies in shadows where none remained. The war for control had just shifted from markets to the very heart of his empire. The boardroom adjourned with silence sharp enough to cut skin, yet whispers followed like ghosts. Michael Donovan said, "They will come for me in the night, not in the open." Amelia Cross muttered, "We must uncover the hand feeding them before it's too late." Oliver Crane sighed, "It may already be too late. The betrayal is from within." The narrator described how footsteps echoed down the corridor like drums of war, every shadow carrying the threat of treachery. Michael Donovan's empire had not yet fallen, but trust had already been assassinated. In those final moments of the day, the fight was no longer for markets or investors. It was for survival against enemies cloaked in the garments of allies. The morning sun cut sharp angles through the blinds as rumors of treachery thickened like smoke. Michael Donovan said, "The silence of allies is louder than the shouts of enemies." Amelia Cross muttered, "Trust is bleeding out of this company faster than capital." Oliver Crane added, "Someone inside is carving us open and feeding the scraps." The narrator described how betrayal dripped not as a single wound, but as 1,000 paper cuts, invisible, yet devastating. Whispers filled corridors where loyalty once lived, and eyes that once admired now measured opportunity in his downfall. The CEO felt the noose tightening, each breath heavier with suspicion. His empire was being carved from within, and the traitor's blade was already sharp. The board's emergency session had begun with icy greetings and forced smiles that cracked under scrutiny. Michael Donovan said, "One of you feeds the enemy with my blood." Amelia Cross whispered, "Proof will drag them into the light, but suspicion eats us faster." Oliver Crane growled, "Every secret we share becomes tomorrow's headline." The narrator described the air heavy as cement, each word sinking like an anchor. Every glance traded across the table bore accusations. Every pause carried weight of betrayal. Trust no longer held them together. Survival demanded a scapegoat. Michael Donovan's voice shook not with fear, but with the fury of a man cornered in his own fortress. The betrayal surfaced in fragments, whispers tied to Oliver Crane's shadowy dealings. Michael Donovan said, "Tell me the truth before the truth devours us both." Oliver Crane snapped, "Loyalty has no place when survival is on the line." Amelia Cross muttered, "This is madness, Oliver. You are feeding the wolves." The narrator described Oliver's eyes darting like a man already guilty, sweat soaking his collar. Betrayal wasn't hidden anymore. It stood exposed under fluorescent lights, raw and undeniable. Company's foundation trembled as the war had finally revealed its traitor. The confrontation reached a breaking point, voices clashing like steel. Michael Donovan shouted, "You sold us to vultures for your own throne." Oliver Crane replied, "Better to stand with power than die with pride." Amelia Cross hissed, "You betrayed every soul working under this roof." The narrator described silence falling after the storm, heavier than the shouting itself. Betrayal wasn't whispered anymore. It was written on every face. Michael Donovan's empire cracked in that moment, and Oliver Crane's smirk confirmed the knife had found its mark. When the meeting ended, betrayal lingered like poison in the air. Michael Donovan said, "I built this empire, and I will not watch it rot in silence." Amelia Cross whispered, "Your war has only begun, Michael, but allies grow fewer by the hour." Oliver Crane smirked, "Empires fall not by armies but by those inside the gates." The narrator described the heavy footsteps echoing through corridors like drums of war, shadows longer than walls. The empire no longer crumbled by markets, it shattered by betrayal's venom. The rival finally moved, power striking like a storm breaking through glass. Daniel Mercer, the manipulative tycoon, said, "Your empire is ripe for harvest, Michael." Michael Donovan growled, "You will not steal what I bled to build." Amelia Cross whispered, "He comes armed with allies, and Oliver's betrayal fuels him." The narrator described the skyline glowing like fire, reflecting in windows that framed the battlefield, not of steel, but of influence. The war was no longer hidden, it was declared in full. Meetings turned to ambushes as investors once loyal now shifted their weight to Daniel Mercer's camp. Michael Donovan said, "Money is no longer the weapon, it is the leash." Amelia Cross muttered, "The shadow investor fuels this rebellion unseen." Oliver Crane whispered, "Control lies with those willing to bleed others dry." The narrator described papers signed like daggers, each contract a betrayal sharper than steel. Michael Donovan fought back, but the tide grew heavier with each step. The disillusioned mentor reappeared. Shadows of his own downfall etched into his face. Richard Hale said, "Ambition costs more than any empire can afford." Michael Donovan muttered, "I am not ready to pay with silence." Amelia Cross said, "His words are scars, Michael. Heed them before they become yours." The narrator described the scene like an old ghost returning to warn of flames that once consumed him. But Michael Donovan's eyes burned too fiercely for retreat. The war demanded fire, not retreat. The shadow investor revealed their presence at last, voice echoing through phone calls that felt like iron chains. Evelyn Price said, "Your empire is a pawn in my larger game." Michael Donovan snarled, "You hide in shadows, but you will face me in the light." Amelia Cross whispered, "She has power greater than money. She has reach." The narrator described invisible strings tightening, each move orchestrated by a hand that never appeared in daylight. Michael Donovan faced not just men in suits, but the ghost of control itself. By night's end, the empire was no longer his fortress but his battlefield. Michael Donovan said, "If I fall, it will be with fire on my hands." Amelia Cross whispered, "The storm is closing, Michael, and survival demands sacrifice." Daniel Mercer smirked, You fight with fury while I fight with silence. The narrator described the skyline alive with lightning, as though the heavens themselves mirrored the war of ambition. Betrayal, rivals, mentors, and shadows circled like predators in the dark. The fight for survival had only sharpened. The storm of betrayal peaked as truths surfaced with the brutality of knives. Michael Donovan said, "Oliver was never alone in this conspiracy." Amelia Cross whispered, "Someone else is pulling the strings far deeper than we imagined." Oliver Crane smirked, "Loyalty is a currency you could never afford, Michael." The narrator described the boardroom now heavy with silence, where secrets once hidden began crawling into the light. In that suffocating moment, trust was no longer fragile. It was already dead. A revelation flickered across faces, as though lightning cracked inside four walls of glass and steel. The Empire trembled, not from external assault, but from venom flowing through its own veins. The twist grew sharper when Daniel Mercer entered uninvited, his smile cold as winter steel. Daniel Mercer said, "Your empire was sold long before today, Michael." Michael Donovan growled, "You dare claim what I built in blood and fire?" Amelia Cross muttered, "This alliance is not chance, it is designed." Oliver Crane sneered, "The throne is already his, you just sit in it for now." The narrator described the boardroom walls closing in, the city lights outside flickering like dying embers. The truth was crueler than rumor. Enemies wore familiar faces, and betrayal was a pact signed in silence. The revelation struck deeper as Evelyn Price's voice echoed from the speakerphone, her power invisible yet suffocating. Evelyn Price said, "Every move you make, Michael, is already mine." Michael Donovan shouted, "You hide like a coward behind shadows." Amelia Cross whispered, "She was the ghost in every loss." Oliver Crane muttered, "Her hands hold the leash, not yours." The narrator described the moment as a blade piercing the heart of the Empire, stripping illusion from truth. The Empire wasn't falling by accident, it was orchestrated destruction. The underdog emerged as Sarah Mitchell, once overlooked, spoke with voice steadier than fire. Sarah Mitchell said, "You built this empire blind to those who carried its weight." Michael Donovan muttered, "And now you claim a stake in its ashes?" Amelia Cross whispered. Her words cut truth into wounds deeper than betrayal. Oliver Crane smirked, "Even the shadows rise when kings stumble." The narrator described Sarah's rise not as ambition, but as inevitability, her resolve etched against the ruins of loyalty. Power shifted unexpectedly, tilting the balance in ways no one had foreseen. By night's end, the revelation was complete. The Empire's collapse was no accident but a coup woven by those closest. Michael Donovan said, "If I fall, it will not be quietly." Amelia Cross whispered, "The walls are gone, Michael. They circle us with fire." Oliver Crane sneered, "You lost long before this battle began." Daniel Mercer smiled, "The throne has always belonged to the ruthless." Sarah Mitchell muttered, "Power belongs to those who seize it, not those who cling." The narrator described the city skyline alive with storm clouds, as if nature itself bore witness to the empire burning. Betrayal, truth, and ambition had collided, and the cost was devastation. The boardroom transformed into a battlefield, where silence was sharper than steel. Michael Donovan said, "You came to strip me of power. But you'll leave knowing I fought for every inch." Daniel Mercer replied, "This empire is already mine, Michael." Amelia Cross whispered, "The walls are closing faster than you can resist." Oliver Crane smirked, "The throne is empty, and you hold nothing but ashes." Sarah Mitchell said, "The empire belongs to those unafraid to stand when kings crumble." The narrator described the clash of ambition like storm against glass, each word striking harder than fists. The final confrontation began not with weapons, but with voices dripping venom. The confrontation escalated, voices colliding with fury. Michael Donovan shouted, "You betrayed the lifeblood of this company." Oliver Crane sneered, "Better betrayal than drowning under your arrogance." Amelia Cross muttered, "Your war has poisoned us all." Sarah Mitchell said, "The company is not yours to destroy, or theirs to steal. It is ours to rebuild." Daniel Mercer smirked. "She speaks as if fire can birth new empires." The narrator described the storm outside, flashing lightning across the skyline, each strike echoing the rage inside. The final battle for control consumed the air like wildfire. The climax reached its sharpest moment as allies collapsed into enemies. Michael Donovan said, "I will not surrender what I bled to build." Daniel Mercer said, "Your empire collapses with or without you." Amelia Cross whispered, "The numbers are gone, Michael. The board leans against you." Oliver Crane shouted, "Fall now, before you drag us deeper into ruin." Sarah Mitchell said, "Strength is not holding power but knowing when to let go." The narrator described tension thick as smoke, fists trembling over polished wood, and the storm roaring like a drum of war. The confrontation became the crucible where ambition either burned or survived. The war turned physical as voices failed. Michael Donovan slammed the table, wood cracking under his force. Michael Donovan said, "You will not erase me." Oliver Crane sneered, "You erased yourself long ago." Daniel Mercer replied, "Your fury is the signature of defeat." Sarah Mitchell said, "Every storm ends, but not every ruler survives it." Amelia Cross muttered, "Michael, they've already written your obituary." The narrator described lightning striking so violently outside that shadows leapt across faces like phantoms. The Empire's crown was slipping, and Michael Donovan stood at the edge of collapse. The final blow was not a shout but a vote. The board raised hands, the decision as sharp as a blade. Michael Donovan said, "You think this vote kills me, but you will live haunted by my fire." Daniel Mercer smirked, "History will forget you by sunrise." Amelia Cross whispered, "Michael, the war is over." Oliver Crane said, "You fought, but you lost." Sarah Mitchell said, "His fall is not the end, it is the beginning of what must come." The narrator described silence descending like a coffin lid, the empire no longer his, but a ghost he once ruled. The confrontation ended with fury swallowed by defeat. The boardroom emptied, leaving echoes of betrayal. Michael Donovan said, "I carried this empire on my shoulders, and you broke it with your greed." Amelia Cross whispered, "Your war leaves scars deeper than losses." Oliver Crane sneered, "History belongs to survivors, not martyrs." Sarah Mitchell said, "The future belongs to those willing to rebuild." Daniel Mercer smirked, "You will fade, Michael, as all fallen kings do." The narrator described the quiet after battle as more haunting than the storm, each empty chair a tombstone of trust. Michael Donovan stood, not as ruler, but as a man broken by ambition's cost. The empire's collapse spilled into headlines faster than dawn. Michael Donovan said, "They will never let me speak my truth." Amelia Cross whispered, "Truth is buried under power, Michael." Oliver Crane muttered, "Your silence serves us better than your words." Sarah Mitchell said, "Silence is a cage, and I refuse it." Daniel Mercer said, "Control belongs to those who write the story." The narrator described news anchors carving his name into a cautionary tale, the empire branded as ashes. Reputation was not just wounded, it was executed before the world's eyes. The ruins of empire became a graveyard of loyalty. Michael Donovan said, "I gave them everything, and they buried me alive." Amelia Cross whispered, "The cost of ambition is always blood." Oliver Crane sneered, "You should have known power cannot be shared." Sarah Mitchell said, "We will rebuild, not for you, but because we must." Daniel Mercer said, "Rebuilding is nothing but polishing ruins." The narrator described silence stretched across the city skyline, each window glowing with whispers of downfall. Ambition's cost was final, but from ruins rose embers of resilience. The mentor returned, his voice echoing lessons soaked in regret. Richard Hale said, "Ambition devours even the strongest kings." Michael Donovan said, "Then, I fought to be devoured." Amelia Cross whispered, "You fought for survival, but lost your soul." Sarah Mitchell said, "His fall will be our warning, not our end." The narrator described Richard Hale's weary eyes reflecting the ruins of his own past, his presence like a ghost haunting ambition's grave. Michael Donovan's silence spoke more than words. He had gone down fighting, but the scars would outlive him. The final moment came with silence heavy as stone. Michael Donovan said, "They may take my empire, but they cannot erase how I fought." Amelia Cross whispered, "Your fight will be remembered in scars." Oliver Crane muttered, "History will not weep for you." Sarah Mitchell said, "History will not forget him. Not while we live to rebuild." Daniel Mercer smirked, "The throne is already mine." The narrator described Michael Donovan walking away from the ashes of his empire, the city lights behind him flickering like dying stars. The CEO had gone down fighting, and his fall left a silence louder than thunder.